Job is going to disobey you. And God was very sure of Job. And then God proved it through Christ that somebody can become man, and as man, that person is going to obey me. Absolutely. But the core of the whole thing is that power only comes by obedience as a function of purity. When we obey, we are sanctified. As we are sanctified, we are made pure to a degree. And that purity to a particular degree gives us a particular degree of power. And what you must always realize is that power is not the end. It's not the end of all of the Christian. Of course, we as Christians, we must have power. But what God desires most is what? Intimacy with Him. He told the children of Israel, Deuteronomy chapter 8 or Deuteronomy chapter 6, that I told them that what does the Lord desire most from you? Not for you to do wonders like Moses did or as Aaron did, but it's that what the Lord does from me is to do what? To love the Lord with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might, to be absolutely intimate with Him. That's the prime desire of Christ. That's the prime desire of God for every Christian. And that's what every Christian must search for, intimacy. And that intimacy can only come when we follow the sanctification program of Christ. Because when we follow that sanctification course, we'll be like, if you look at the case in Matthew chapter 10, it said that Christ, these were the disciples, so they had not even done anything there. Many of them, they were still idol worshippers. Many of them, they were still Jews that followed the law. But they said that because they were close to Christ, Christ gave them power. And many of them went out. They were casting demons, doing different things. Imagine, people that did not really know God. Imagine, it's like the same Peter that was casting out demons in Matthew chapter 10 is the same Peter that was going to deny Christ later. This was the same Peter in Galatians chapter 2 that Paul was teaching. Paul was basically reteaching Peter the gospel because Paul said that he withstood Peter because Peter was wrong. But despite that lack of knowledge, despite that lack of anything, because they were close to Christ, because they were intimate with Christ to a particular degree, they had a degree of power and they were able to cast out demons. This what they call it, exorcism, casting out demons, is something that is very special to us and something that is very, very rare in the Christians today. If somebody can cast out demons, you see that person as a very powerful person, a very powerful Christian. But apparently, this is something that is very, very easy. This is something that is very, very, very simple. The first power that came to them when they were written was to cast out demons. And what the God Christ told them, when Christ did it the first time, when they tried to do it, Christ told them that this power can only come by prayer and fasting. Just pray and fast. Do it to a particular degree. When you have that obedience in praying and fasting, you are consecrated, you are sanctified to a particular degree. You are purified to a particular degree. And by virtue of that purification, the power to cast out demons comes upon you. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, he was telling the children of Israel that when they go to the land, when they get to Canaan land, they must keep all the laws that he has given them. All the celebration, the Feast of Tents, the Feast of Pentecost, the Jubilee, the Atonement Day, the Passover, they must keep all those things. Basically, they must celebrate him. And one constant in all the celebrations, all the Jewish festivals to Christ was that it always involves giving of one kind or the other. If it's the Feast of Tents, all of them, they will come out, they will cook food. If it's the Feast of Passover, even though it's unleavened bread that will be bitter, but they will cook food, and the whole family has to come and eat from that food. So there's always a form of giving and a form of service. And he told them in Deuteronomy chapter 8 that if they should not forget all these things, because it's the one that gives them the power to create wealth. So that the power for riches comes from service. It comes from service in giving. And I say that it's a law that even unbelievers, when they give, when they obey, they are able to accumulate wealth. They are able to create wealth. So that what this shows us is that for different levels of power, there are different levels of obedience that we must do. There are different things that we must do. And what that obedience does is that when we obey those particular things, it gives the Holy Spirit avenue to work on us to a particular level. And what the Holy Spirit does to us is that the Holy Spirit cleanses us. He purifies us. He consecrates us. And that space that is left by consecration is now filled with a power that can work through us. So that's the link between purity and power. Without purity, there can be no power. Every degree of purity that comes through the sanctification program of the Father, it leads to a degree of power. So when we find ourselves lacking in power, when we see that we want to do things and we are not able to do them, our next reaction is not to just go and pray. God, power, 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 power. No. Do the hard work. Look at yourself. What is this thing that God is telling me to do that I'm finding it difficult to do? Because obedience is the most difficult thing. Me, as a Christian, that's what I've realized. Prayer is not difficult at all. Coming to the church environment and praying here for 6 hours with unbelievers is not difficult at all. But now, going out and obeying in this world system is basically the most difficult thing an unbeliever can do. That's why I can see people in church, they will say that in church, this person's behavior is one way, but this person's behavior outside church is another way. It's not the person's fault. Obedience is extremely difficult. And, well, that's another topic for another day. But then obedience is the core. It's obedience that brings the power. The prayer that we think brings power, prayer is actually obedience. So that men ought to pray and not to watch. When you obey that edict, men ought to pray. You have a degree of power. When you obey that edict, men